Hello everyone, I have returned to my WCW Monday Nitro Retrospective where I take a look back at the best years of WCW Monday Nitro's history. And we are continuing right along with the first half of 1997. Previous editions, I've talked about the NWO, the formation of the NWO, the rise of it, and how they just completely ran wild all over WCW and basically took over the show. And at the very end of 1996, it looked like WCW had no heroes except for one man, the lone gunman, Rowdy Roddy Piper, and it culminated with him defeating Hollywood Hogan in a non-title match at Starrcade at the end of the year. So as we enter 1997, now's the time for WCW's heroes to kind of get their act together, because leading into this year, part of the problem that WCW had in standing up to the NWO was that they just couldn't get on the same page. They just couldn't get unified, too many feuds already going on, too many bitter feelings among the different wrestlers, and they just were not able to appropriately respond to the NWO. They lost Sting, who walked out after WCW lost faith in him. Randy Savage walked out after Halloween Havoc, and he's been gone up to this point. And it just looks like WCW's really been struggling. But in 97, the first half of 97, we start to see the heroes emerge, and that's really the major theme of this entry in the Nitro Retrospective. This is where we start to see the WCW babyfaces start to fight back a little bit. And new heroes emerge to take on the NWO. And when I look back on 1997 WCW, when I hear the criticism that, the NWO just completely ran roughshod over everything and the WCW babyfaces just couldn't get over. They weren't allowed to get over, blah, 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 and they were just always made to look like chumps. And I'm like, that's not entirely true. When we start getting to 98, that's where that becomes more of a problem. But in 97, plenty of guys started to emerge and to take on the NWO, and they all got over. That was the other thing. Some of these guys became some of the most over guys in the company. When I think of some of these guys, one name that jumps out at me right off the bat, because he got the title shot against Hogan and sold out, was former WCW World Champion turned NWO member, and then left that faction due to bad feelings with Hollywood Hogan, and that was The Giant. Paul White, known as The Big Show to you WWE fans. And I gotta tell you, watching these episodes of Nitro again, I have gained an all-new appreciation for The Giant, because he was booked about as well as a Giant could ever be booked. He was booked as an unstoppable force. And that was true going back to the Dungeon of Doom days. I know the Dungeon of Doom is garbage, but The Giant was the best part of it. And his run as WCW champion, and then when he joined the NWO, they looked unstoppable because they had The Giant on their side. But then once he won the World War III Battle Royal, that laid the seeds for him to have his redemption arc, where he would realize that the NWO didn't have his best interests at heart, and he would join back in with WCW and become one of their greatest heroes. Of course, they would ruin that in 1998, but that's another discussion entirely. I'll get there when I get there. But the Giant's face turn and redemption, becoming one of WCW's big heroes, was really great to see, especially since nobody really trusted him right off the bat, and why should they? He had joined up with the NWO and betrayed them before. The first man to reach out to him was another man who I've gained a whole new appreciation for in watching these Nitros, Lex Luger. And you go back and you look at Lex Luger and the Giant in Nitro, both as a tag team together, because they were like a singles thrown together tag team there for a while, even defeating the Outsiders at a WCW pay-per-view, the February show. Excuse me. And you look at them as single stars, where they would come out most weeks, and in Luger's case, he would, fans wanted to see him torture rack somebody, and the Giant would just chokeslam bitches left and right and just dominate and destroy. They had established two strong, powerful forces that could match up against the NWO, and they worked great as a team, and they worked great in singles. And looking back on it, and coming at this now with a fresh perspective, I mean, I'd have to rank the Giant and Lex Luger up there as one of the surprise, successful mongrel tag teams. And I use the term mongrel tag teams, where they take two singles guys and they just throw them together and see if it works. The Mega Powers and the Rock and Sock Connection would be the prime examples of that. There's Owen Hart and Yokozuna. Chris Jericho and Big Show was an example of one that worked really well. I gotta throw Giant and Luger up there as this underrated, really good, two main event players joining together into a tag team. And I thought they did really well. They helped each other. They helped each other get over stronger as characters. I think their friendship and their partnership helped to set them apart from everybody else. And I thought they were great. I thought they were great, both as singles and as a tag team. And Luger would get to be the most over he had ever been in his entire career, because while Sting's not on TV, and I'll get to Sting in a minute, but when Sting's not around, Luger kind of had to be the top guy to go after the NWO, and that would culminate later in the year in August of 97, and probably the biggest moment of Lex Luger's career. But Luger was mad over, and going back and watching these shows, I've gained an all-new appreciation for the Giant and Lex Luger that maybe I wasn't always fair to them when I was younger. And, I got on the internet at a time in the late 90s where big guys were kind of looked down upon, and guys like the Giant didn't get a lot of love. And watching these shows, like Giants, especially the Giant, he's become one of my favorite guys to watch in these shows. Every time he pops up, I pop. And it gets even better towards the end of the year, but we'll cover that in the next video. We're only going up to, we're going through June 97 in this video. But I think the Giant's face run in WCW was really, really well done, and I don't think he gets nearly enough credit for it. And it really speaks to, and he was a young guy, still green at this point, but they booked him correctly. So it speaks to how good booking can help hide the weaknesses of somebody. And if you present a Giant like a Giant, they're going to get over. And I think Big Show, or Giant at this point, is a perfect example of that. And he could have been like, you look at him in WCW, and he could have been like the Andre of his era. In WWE, very rarely was I a fan of how he was booked in WWE, because a lot of times they would just book him like a normal guy and he would lose. And it's like, that's kind of kills the mystique of a 7-foot, 500-pound monster when he loses most of the time. And they turned him heel and face so many times that it just became a joke after a while. In WCW, they only had one bad heel turn. That didn't work for me, but I'll get there when I talk about 1998. And as is, again, going back and watching these, I really gained a whole new appreciation for the Giant and Lex Luger. And if you decide to go back and watch these Nitros for yourself, keep an eye out for those two, because I really think, look at it with a fresh perspective. I think people that go back and watch this stuff are going to come out of this thinking that Lex Luger and the Giant are a lot better than they got credit for at the time and even today. I think they were a pleasant surprise, and reliving all that stuff, again, with a fresh perspective, really made me come to appreciate them. Another hero that would emerge was the mid-Carter, who had started to show signs of development in 96, and his feud with Eddie Guerrero and getting the Diamond Cutter over and things like that really helped to start to set him apart. But Diamond Dallas Page's breakout year was 1997, and it all started with that famous moment where the Outsiders offered him a spot in the NWO, and he turned him down by giving the Diamond Cutter to Scott Hall. And it was the first time that a WCW homegrown guy, because Piper got over on them, but Piper made a name for himself elsewhere. Diamond Dallas Page was a homegrown WCW star character talent that got over on the NWO, and it was so cathartic at the time. And that's the other thing about this particular period, as you start to see all the heroes start to emerge. Whenever they get over on the NWO, it is so cathartic, and it is so pleasing, because the NWO dominates for these long stretches, and then WCW just comes back and bitch slaps them right in the face. And it's so great. It's always like a huge feel-good moment. And my choice for favorite episode during this period is going to reflect that. But Diamond Dallas Page, that moment really helped to skyrocket him towards the top. And having him go out on TV and come up with all these new variations of the Diamond Cutter really helped to establish him as well. And that's another thing, like these Nitros have done a terrific job of, watching them again. They did a terrific job of getting people's finishers over, from the Torture Rack to the Choke Slam to the Diamond Cutter, all these other ones. And there'll be other examples of it when I get into later in 97 and 98 as well. It's really, really great stuff. But the other thing that helped Diamond Dallas Page was his feud with the Macho Man Randy Savage, which, oh my God, I love this feud so much. And it did win Feud of the Year for 1997. A year, by the way, that had plenty of great options for Feud of the Year. Austin Brett, Shawn and Taker, Sting and Hogan, Brett and Shawn, if you want to lean into the reality side of things, Brett and Shawn for sure. I mean, there were plenty of great options for Feud of the Year they gave it to Savage and DDP, and I'm like, yeah, I'm cool with that. That makes sense to me. It was a great feud, and it was capturing the insanity of Macho Man Randy Savage to perfection, and getting the girls involved as well, with Kimberly and Diamond Dallas Page's corner and Elizabeth and Macho Man's corner, so they had that to play with. And DDP getting that big pay-per-view win over Savage at Spring Stampede really helped to really catapult Diamond Dallas Page. And, he just had such a great year in 1997. He did so well, so well. And I make it no secret, I'm a big Diamond Dallas Page mark. And going back and rewatching all of this stuff was grade A material for me. And I just loved it. I just loved it. And every time Savage and DDP would interact with each other in Nitro, it was gold, because you really felt like they wanted to beat the shit out of each other. And, funny for Diamond Dallas Page's development, it's kind of funny that, originally they tried to paint DDP as like, in 96, they were leaning into he's coming to a lot of money and he's super rich and everything. And they seem to be going in that direction with him. When they stripped that away and kind of just made Page the people's champion, like the blue-collar, everyman type of babyface, that seemed to get him over a lot more. Almost like, in some sense, like kind of like a 90s version of a Dusty Rhodes in a way. Diamond Dallas Page, of course, unique enough to stand on his own without being compared to Dusty, but he just really blossomed in 97. I think Savage brought a lot of great stuff out of him, and I think he shined like crazy during this period. So it was a joy to go back and watch Diamond Dallas Page's stuff. Other heroes that emerged, the biggest one was the man called Sting, who had been gone for a while, following WCW guys losing their faith in him. And he had started to develop the Crow gimmick at the tail end of 96, and we were starting to see it, like him going after Rick Steiner and things like that. And they kind of made it look like he was going to join the NWO, and then for a brief period, he joined up with Randy Savage, who was also on the outside looking in. And Savage ultimately joined the NWO, which was a huge blow to WCW, that they, Savage just lost his spirit and pretty much got banned from the company. And then he just joined the NWO because he was that disenfranchised. It's like, oh man, that's a huge loss. And then you thought, because he was hanging around with Sting, it was like, oh shit, is Sting going to join the NWO? Oh no. And they got a lot of drama out of that, because it really looked like for a while that Sting, they had us on the edge of our seat that Sting was going to officially join the NWO. And part of me kind of wishes, and maybe this is just me being a fanboy, but part of me kind of wishes that Savage and Sting stayed together and they did like their own dark version of the Mega Powers. But it worked. What they did worked, and I'm okay with it. But everything led up to Uncensored 1997, the tail end of that show, where the NWO gets the victory in that stupid Battle Royal main event that nobody really cared about. But it led to probably my favorite moment in WCW history, where Sting came down from the rafters, full Crow garb, and finally attacked the NWO. And look at the pop when Sting goes after them. It is unfucking real. And like I said, it's probably my favorite moment in WCW history. And it's terrific. Absolutely terrific. And as big as it was when Hogan turned heel at the end of Bash at the Beach, that moment was like the greatest babyface moment that WCW ever did. It was absolutely fantastic. And it established Sting as like the guy. This is the hero. This is the guy that's going to take down the NWO. And that would ultimately lead to Starrcade at the end of the year, which I'll get into that when I do 1997 Part 2 for Nitro. But here I'm only going to go up through June 97. And Sting obviously doesn't wrestle during that period. But that made him more exciting in a way, because you didn't know when Sting was going to show up. The crowds would chant, "We want Sting," but he wouldn't always come out. And then sometimes he would come out and clean house. So he was like this mysterious character that you never knew what he was going to do, and he was unpredictable. And that's, a lot of characters at this time period benefited from being a little unpredictable. Stone Cold Steve Austin, perfect example, probably the best example of that. NWO, you didn't know when they were going to come out or when they were going to strike, but when they did, you knew shit was going to go down, and it was going to be bad. Sting, you didn't know when he was going to come out, but when he did, you knew it was going to be a big deal. And that's something that's, I feel, is sorely missing. We live in this world where wrestling today is very paint by numbers and formulaic. And, having a wild card like Sting, thrown into the mix really makes things a lot more exciting, at least to me. So that was great. I really enjoyed that. And other stuff that was going on during this period, this is where the tag division really started to shine for me. This is where they started the Steiner Brothers and Outsiders feud that went for over a year, with the Steiner Brothers chasing the Outsiders and trying to get the tag titles from them. And they would just screw them over at every turn. It will ultimately lead to Ted DiBiase leaving the NWO because it felt like they didn't know what to do with him after a while. Once Eric Bischoff joined the group, it felt like they didn't know what to do with Ted anymore. So ultimately, they just had Ted a few months. They took him off TV for a couple months, and then they had him join up with the Steiner Brothers as kind of like the guy. It's like, look, I've been with the NWO. I know what they're like on the inside, and I can help you take the titles from the Outsiders. So, but yeah, that feud started this year, at this early portion of 97. We got one terrific segment where the Outsiders forced the Steiners to crash their car, and it looked really good. Like, it looked really convincing how they edited that together. The whole, like, attempted murder thing that the Outsiders didn't get arrested for. But the segment itself looked very, very good. Looked like it was done on a handheld home video camera, and it was edited very well. But anyway, when you have the Steiner Brothers, they become like the top baby faces in the tag team division. A tag team division that felt like it was designed by me, because if you know me, you know I like bruisers. I like big brawling guys that beat the shit out of people. The Steiners, yes, they can be technical, but they can also beat the shit out of guys too. So they fit that mold. And this is where Scott was starting to get bigger and would fit more into the, not quite there yet, but he was starting to bulk up and get into that big Papa Pump phase. And you have the Outsiders, obviously, who brawl and beat the shit out of people. You have Harlem Heat, who brawl and beat the shit out of people, are fucking awesome when they do it. You have the Faces of Fear, who are sorely underrated, Ming and the Barbarian, and they beat the shit out of people, and it's fun to watch. You had Public Enemy around, and they have the hardcore matches and everything. I don't think Wrath and Mortis... Oh, actually, they were. Yes, Wrath and Mortis were established at this point. And I got to a point where I was actually popping for them, but I think I'll talk about that more when I get into the second half of 97. And they started working with some of those tag teams I just mentioned, because at this point they were pretty much just there to work with Glacier. And Glacier's an interesting thing. I haven't talked too much about Glacier yet, but I think I made a comment on Twitter that he's kind of like the WCW version of Tatanka. And what I mean by that is that they brought him in with a lot of fanfare, gave him a lot of hype, and it's clear that they wanted to push him to the moon. But he just didn't get over the way that they wanted him to. And he was not terrible. Like, I watch him and it's like, I don't hate the gimmick. I don't hate him, but I don't love him either. It's a nice, different thing from what the NWO is doing. So it's like, it's kind of like the Cruiserweight division in a way, where the Cruiserweights provide a completely different form of entertainment from what is done in the NWO and those main event angles. And the Cruiserweight division, of course, you've got Malenko, you've got Mysterio, you've got Ultimo Dragon, you've got Eddie Guerrero, you've got all these guys that are great talents waiting to develop. Like, Jericho was there at this point, but babyface Jericho sucked. Like, royally sucked. I'm like, oh my God, I can't wait until you turn heel because you suck right now. And Eddie's not great either, but Eddie would get much, 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 much better as a heel, as we would see later in 1997. But the Cruiserweight division provides the action, and they did a very good job of that. And I think Dean Malenko was a very good kind of cornerstone of the entire division at this early point. He gave it credibility. With all the flippy flops going on, you had somebody as legit as Dean Malenko. I think he grounded it pretty well and gave him a nice, like, top guy to kind of focus everything around. And so I was digging the tag division, I was digging the Cruiserweights, I was digging the main event stuff. It was all just peaches and cream, just highly enjoyable stuff all around, with the NWO as like the main focus. And this is also where we start to see Dennis Rodman show up, and that was a huge deal. Huge deal, getting Dennis Rodman there. And I think he fit the NWO like a glove. Like, he just, of all the celebrity involvements in pro wrestling, I think Rodman fit in with that group just so perfectly that even if you didn't know who he was from his NBA career or anything like that, if you watched him walk out with the NWO, it just looked like a perfect fit. And you'd be like, yeah, he's part of the group. That makes sense. That's... So yeah, we're just trucking along at this point. Again, the baby faces are getting starting to get their shit together. And there was one thing I wanted to bring this up when I talked about Sting, but it slipped my mind. There's a point where some NWO members get jumped. There was Ray Traylor and VK Wall Street. That was Mike Rotunda doing a comedy parody bit on Vince McMahon, clearly. But they had joined the NWO. But then they got randomly assaulted on 2 episodes of Nitro, and they never revealed who attacked them, but they ultimately got kicked out of the NWO. But we never found out who exactly attacked them. Now, I assumed it was Sting, but we never got a clear answer on that. So it would have been nice to get like a clear answer. It's like, yeah, Sting did it. By the way, Sting beating up the fake Sting that they introduced in late '96, who was still around. I mean, people forget, fake Sting was there for a long time. This was not just like a one-off gimmick that they did for that fall brawl. He was there for a while. And watching Sting beat the ever-living shit out of him was so satisfying. So satisfying. And again, that was kind of the theme of these episodes was, yeah, the NWO's still in control, and yeah, they're still going strong, but WCW's getting their shit together, and it's looking much better for them than it did in the latter half of 1996. So, with all of that, one more thing I want to cover during this period before I get into my best ofs for this period. The worst part, and I hate to say this, but the worst part of the first half of 1997 were the Four Horsemen. And I hate to say that, but every week they would have a promo and they were terrible, mainly because they started giving Deborah more mic time. And the crowd started hating her, but I'm like, yeah, but I think that's go-away heat. I think they hate her because she sucks. And I can't listen to her talk for more than 10 seconds. And that was annoying. And then they tried to do angles with like mistrust among the Four Horsemen, and it didn't really go anywhere. The best thing that the Horsemen did was the Benoit-Sullivan feud, which has its own awkwardness because of real-life events. But they had some awesome brawls out of it. We certainly got some good stuff out of Benoit and Sullivan during this period. It's just a shame that stuff that happened behind the scenes led to some awkward shit down the road. But in any case, yeah, the Four Horsemen just didn't do it for me at this point. I guess maybe they had just been beaten to shit by the NWO. By this point, to where it almost felt like they were a little irrelevant. And, you know, Steve Mongo McMichael was there, and I don't know if I've talked about him too much as a wrestler. I think that he would have been fine if he was like a sometimes guy, like a celebrity working a match once in a while, but they kept trying to make him like a regular. And I've seen worse, but I've also seen a lot better. People forget, he also used the tombstone as a finish, which almost feels like it was a work. It was like a rib on Undertaker. May have been the case. It's kind of like, and I noticed shit like that back in the day where it's like, all right, Mongo's doing the tombstone. Is that a rib on Taker? Billy Gunn started doing the jackhammer in the middle of matches and wasn't beating anybody with it. And I was like, is that a rib on Goldberg? I would just notice shit like that on both shows, like just sniping back and forth at each other. But this period, this first half of 97, I mean, this represented a major low point for the WWE, where coming out of WrestleMania 13 and the infamous Raw from Germany that I'm sure you've heard Jim Cornette talk about, WWE looked dead as a doornail at this point, whereas WCW, I mean, this looks like the show. This is where all the exciting stuff is happening, minus, you know, yes, WWE, they have Undertaker, they have Stone Cold Steve Austin, who had just turned face at WrestleMania and everything, but they really looked like they were on the ropes, and WCW just looked way better in comparison. And going back and rewatching it, it's easy to see why, because WCW was the more exciting show at this point. So that's my take. So with all that, let's go into my pick for MVP during this period. There's a few options. I think Piper deserves a lot of credit for his batshit crazy promos, which were always a joy. Dean Malenko deserves credit for being like the crown jewel of the cruiserweight division. I've already talked about the Giant and Lex Luger and how great they were. And the NWO being the perfect villains to drive all the storylines, especially Hollywood Hogan and the Outsiders and those guys. They were great in their roles as well. And I think a lot of people would probably expect me to say Sting, but I'm going to hold back on that a little bit because Sting he wasn't a regular thing on the show. For me, the guy that I enjoyed watching the most during this period was Diamond Dallas Page. His evolution from mid-Carter to main event level was absolutely amazing, and I had a blast watching it. So, yeah, I'm going to give the nod to Diamond Dallas Page. He was absolutely incredible during this period, and it was his coming out party. So I think it's worthy of praise. Best match during this period, I'm going to give it to Harlem Heat versus the Faces of Fear, a match from the March 24th, 1997 episode. I've said it before, I like big guys beating the shit out of each other. This match was 4 big guys beating the shit out of each other, and I loved it. It was great. Highly enjoyable. And like I said, I feel like the Faces of Fear are underrated as a team. Harlem Heat, going back and watching them, it really reaffirmed my belief that, yeah, they really were one of the best tag teams in WCW's history. I know when people think of WCW tag teams, they think of the Steiner Brothers, the Road Warriors. Going back to the Jim Crockett days, they think of like the Rock and Roll Express, the Midnight Express, and those guys. And they're all great. I mean, this tag team wrestling, when you do it right, it can be amazing. But I think Harlem Heat deserves to be counted in that same class as one of the top tag teams that WCW ever had. They were absolutely incredible. And this match was a good showcase of what they could do with other teams. And you got Ming and the Barbarian who just go out there and beat the shit out of people. And you put all 4 of them together, and it was pure magic, and I really enjoyed it. I really, really did. But best episode, I'm going to give it to the week before, the St. Patrick's Day episode, March 17th, 1997. This was the night after Uncensored 97. It felt like WCW was galvanized by Sting's decision to attack the NWO. So this is where WCW really stood tall against them. I made a list. We got Diamond Dallas Page, who went after Macho Man. We got Sting coming out, and he stares down Hogan and makes his intentions clear of who he wants to go after. And then you had Luger, Giant, and the Steiners, and Harlem Heat all attack the NWO in a unified front, showing WCW's dominance. So, like I said, whenever WCW got the best of the NWO, it was cathartic, and this was probably the best example of it. Especially coming off the high of Uncensored 1997 and what I felt was the greatest moment in company history. All of it terrific stuff. So that concludes this Nitro retrospective. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. And sometime soon, hopefully later in the month of July, I will have the second half of 1997 as we head towards Starrcade 97. And we witness the debut of a certain major player in WCW's history. So I will be very excited to talk about all of that. So that is all I have for you now. Thanks again, everybody, for watching, and I will see you all later.